Hello, so I'm Matt Kutz. I am one of the adjunct faculty members here at Griffin. Excited to be here with you. I'm going to be talking to you today about the role of leadership in innovation. So we're going to spend 15 or 20 minutes here, and hopefully by the end of this conversation, you should have some really neat and new questions about innovation and how it's relative to healthcare in particular. I want to start by giving you my summary point or the bottom line. The bottom line that you need to be able to take away from this talk today is two parts. One is that leaders set the expectations for innovation. So it's really important. The type and the style of leadership that you have are important because it does set the tone for the rest of the department, the organization, the team that you're working with. And what you say, how you behave, and how you practice your leadership, and specifically your philosophy of leadership that you bring to your department, to your team, will indeed set the tone for what you expect and what you get relative to innovation and creativity. The second key point that I think is important you understand is that innovation is going to occur regardless of what you do. However, leadership can and does accelerate that process. So if we want to be very intentional about innovation, if we want to create a culture or environment where innovation is something that is honored, something that is generated, something that is expected from the team, then we can do certain things, and particularly relative to our philosophy of leadership, we can adopt a certain philosophy of leadership that will help drive innovation in a new and exciting way. So those are the things that are important to take away from what we talk about this morning or this afternoon as we go through. I want to start with one of the key issues with leadership, and that's the philosophy of leadership that you bring with you as you practice leadership in your departments, with your team, with your staff, etc. And this is true whether you're on the administrative side of healthcare or the clinical side of healthcare. What we find is this concept of heroic leadership, which is a very common type of leadership throughout leadership, regardless of the country that you're in. And the main premise of heroic leadership is that the leader themselves is the only or single problem solver. And that can create a problem because it creates codependency within the team, and the team eventually will come to believe that they can't solve the problem or won't solve the problem because that's the leader's job and it's not their job. So we want to be very careful in how we develop our leadership behaviors and our leadership philosophy that we bring, because we want our staff, our teams, our departments, our followers, everybody we work with, we want them to feel like they participate in the process of innovation. And we don't want innovation to be rogue. And if we go back to that first slide, remember we said innovation is going to occur whether the leader sets the proper tone or not. However, it's important to understand that when innovation occurs for a leader who is hostile, or a leader who is heroic, a leader who believes that they are the ones and the only ones to do it, then it creates a type of innovation that is covert. And we want to avoid covert innovation. We want to avoid the type of innovation that is looked at as rogue or outside of what's expected, because then it creates subcultures within the department that undermines the leader's authority. So that's critical to understand. So in the definition here, Hornstein and DeGuer talk specifically about the hazards of heroic leadership relative to innovation. And this quote here is important for you to read. So it says, organizations that operate from authoritarian, hierarchical, command and control model, where the top leaders control the work, control the information, control the decisions, the allocation, and control the allocation of resources, it produces a type of employee that are less empowered, less creative, and less productive. This has a tragic and a very negative impact on innovation. So if you want to know what heroic leadership is at the very first part of this definition. An heroic leader is authoritarian, hierarchical. They control the flow of information coming out. They maintain their power and their persona of a leader by manipulating the environment, by controlling information from a policy and procedure standpoint. And when leaders behave like that, yes, they tend to get things done, and that's why we still see leaders like that in organizations, because the way we reward managers for productivity, so they tend to get things done. However, they get things done in a very prescribed manner, and it tends to really hamper and hinder innovation. So we want to get things done and have an innovative team. So we need to adopt a new type of leadership philosophy or a different type of approach. And that's something that I've come to call an organic leadership approach. So contemporary leaders, these are leaders who are leading in environments that are really the modern contemporary, what's going on today, where the healthcare environment is very complex, very turbulent, very disruptive, very changing all the time. So that's the economy that we're in today. Rules, regulations, policies are changing so often that we have to adopt a new leadership philosophy. And I would say that that philosophy includes things like organic leadership as opposed to heroic leadership. When we adopt organic leadership mindset, we see this. We see leaders, contemporary leaders or these organic leaders know that there is no single individual that has all the ideas, all the skills, and all the time necessary to carry out complex tasks. So the first thing an organic leader that fosters innovation will do is they will realize they are not the sole producer of new ideas, the sole generator of creative strategy. They realize that it takes a team to truly be creative and a team that is engaged and has bought into the process. So these organic leaders know that organizations will not survive if their leadership is limited to the top leaders only, and that leadership opportunities exist at every level in the organization. So here's something else unique about this approach to leadership that's important for you to understand, is that we do need to distinguish between everybody being a leader and everybody practicing leadership. So that's an important thing. It should be obvious, at least it's obvious to me, that not everyone can be the leader, but everyone can and should demonstrate leadership. And that leadership certainly includes creativity and innovation. So that's critical. So for an organization to become innovative and successful, it must benefit from the creativity of all the members of the team, all the members of the department, all the members of the organization. And everyone in the organization in some way, and that's critical that you highlight and emphasize that point, that in some way needs to be involved in leadership and practicing leadership behaviors, okay? So let's remember this. A key thing in an innovative framework for leaders is that not everyone can be the leader, and that person who is the leader is not the only one who generates ideas and creativity. So they need to create an environment where everyone sees themselves as being able to contribute. If we move on here, this is kind of an important seminal piece to innovation. And if you want to understand innovation the way it was originally introduced back in the 60s in an organizational context, you have to look to Peter Drucker's 7 drivers of innovation. And here we have those. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of giving examples of each one of these because we don't have the time to do that. But one of the things that is very important for you to do as an assignment as you're watching this discussion and this lecture is go through as I talk about each one of these and try to think of specific examples where healthcare could benefit from some of these drivers of innovation. So the first driver of innovation is the unexpected. When something happens that you're just not prepared for or did not anticipate. When that happens, we have to do things in a new way. Now, a lot of times, the biggest benefit, if you talk to entrepreneurs, for example, a huge benefit in an entrepreneurial setting is the failures that they've experienced along the way, because you learn what not to do. And in the process of learning what not to do, you often experiment with new things. And in experimenting with those new things, you usually come up with an innovative idea, an innovative strategy. And again, just to lay some foundation too, innovation, the way we're describing it, implies either bringing a brand new product to market or using an existing product in a brand new way. The second driver of innovation is an incongruity. An incongruity is when there is a difference in what is perceived to be happening and what actually is happening. So a lot of times we enter into a new scenario, a new job, a new venue, a new department, and we think things are a certain way. And we realize very quickly that they're not the way we thought they would be, or not the way that they were supposed to be. And when we find that to be true, oftentimes we are forced to come up with innovative ideas on how to integrate, on how to use interpersonal skills, on how to implement policies and procedures, for example. So I'm sure you can think of several examples of when you needed to do something different than how you've always done it before, because when you arrived somewhere, it wasn't quite how you expected it to be. The third driver of innovation are process needs. And this is identifying weaknesses from the stakeholder's perspective. Now, within healthcare, there are multiple stakeholders, but there are some key stakeholders. As a healthcare manager, you might be surprised to find out that your key stakeholder may not be the patient. It's probably the clinician. And then in addition to that, you have the patient themselves, who is an obvious stakeholder. You have the families of those patients, which are key stakeholders. And then you also have the community in which your healthcare facility is located. So those are at least 4 key stakeholders. And what's really interesting about that is oftentimes those stakeholder expectations and the perceptions that those stakeholders bring compete with each other. What a patient expects and what a clinician expects from the management of the hospital might be 2 completely different things that may even be at odds with each other. When that happens, that's called a process need. When you recognize that as a manager and administrator, you have to come up with a new way to accomplish your task. So that is a big driver of innovation. The fourth are changes in industry. That's pretty straightforward. Anytime there's a new regulation, a new policy, a new government rule or law that affects healthcare, you have to change the way you do business. The 5th driver of innovation are changes in demographics. So we know that patients are living longer. As patients live longer, they require a different type of healthcare, different type of interaction. The way you implement policies and procedures and certain intake, whether it's admissions or discharge procedures for older geriatric populations versus younger, more healthy populations, are completely different. So those are changes. Education is a big change in a demographic. As education becomes more readily available internationally with online programs and things like that, the demographic change. We have a more educated population. Or if you're in a rural community, you might have a much less educated population. So you might have to adjust how you do things based on the demographics, which usually forces innovation. Then we have changes in meaning and perception. These are paradigms, how things are done, and just based on political correctness, gender identity, things like that, which used to not to be an issue that are now issues, are really important for you to understand. And they change, the meaning of even gender, male, female, has changed. So how does that drive innovation? And then finally, new knowledge. And that's, again, a very obvious, simple one to look at with technology. The fact that you're watching this video right now today using the technology that I'm in right now wouldn't happen 20 years ago when I started teaching. It was possible, but because we can do this, there are all new things. And think about healthcare, X-ray machines, surgical machines. We talk quite a bit in the States about robots doing surgical procedures and things like that, and how is that technology changing the face of healthcare, and even clinical competencies are changing dramatically. So these are Drucker's 7 drivers of innovation, and the challenge for you that I present to you is go through these 7 things and look at how they drive innovation in your workplace. I'm going to not spend a lot of time on this slide for the sake of time, but it is an important slide. Morgan put out in 2018 the ecosystem of an innovative environment. And you can look at each one of these 4 things. You can see the link there as well, so you can look up this piece yourself and read about it. But you'll see, to truly create an innovative ecosystem or innovative environment, you need to have 4 things interactive there. And you can see how the leader obviously has significant impact on each of these 4 areas. The people that they hire, you bring in, their skill level, the policies that are in place, the processes that are in place, the willingness to experiment, the use of technology, etc., as well as then the climate, which is a part of culture. So those are really important pieces to innovation. So kind of bringing this kind of to a summary, it's important that leaders actively encourage creativity and innovation through creating a more conducive environment to diversity. And I want to just spend one moment quickly on diversity. And in this particular case, now we talk a lot about diversity relative to gender, race, ethnicity, etc., and those are critically important. But in this particular case, we're talking about diversity from an experience or ideas perspective. So while we should certainly foster an environment that has multiple genders, multiple ethnicities, cultures, etc., it is also important that within that we actively try to bring in people with divergent and different ideas as well. And when we foster that type of environment, then we find innovation skyrocketing, and the leader has a major hand in that. So we can see here, back to the original points we made, a leader can set the expectations for innovation with their environment, and it is important that they do so. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you can email me directly. I'm happy to respond. Thank you.